How does a simple housewarming dinner turn into the moment a quiet man flips the script on his own family? When my brother and his wife tried to publicly shame me for not handing over the apartment I worked so hard for, I said nothing, just walked outside, called my lawyer, and changed everything. They never saw it coming, but that night was the start of the reckoning that ended with my brother begging for forgiveness and his wife exposed for who she really was. The warm glow of my new house's dining room should have been perfect for celebrating. I'd spent months planning this housewarming dinner, carefully arranging the furniture, selecting the wine, preparing the guest list. My brother Greg, his wife Brittany, her parents Walter and Marlene Harrow, my Aunt Linda, and a few close friends like Marlo Shaw were all gathered around my polished oak table. The conversation flowed easily at first. Compliments on the house, questions about the mortgage, the usual small talk that comes with these family gatherings. But I could feel the tension building from the moment Brittany walked through my front door. She'd made a show of examining every room, commenting loudly about the upgrade I'd made from my old apartment. Her parents, Walter and Marlene, had been equally vocal, making pointed remarks about how spacious my previous place must feel now that it was just sitting empty. "So, Curtis," Brittany said, swirling her wineglass as she leaned back in her chair, "when are you finally going to hand over those keys?" She laughed, but there was nothing lighthearted about her tone. "I mean, it's been 3 weeks since you moved out. My parents are practically living in a hotel at this point." The dining room fell quiet. Marlo shifted uncomfortably beside me while Aunt Linda raised her eyebrows from across the table. I set down my fork carefully, keeping my voice level. "As I've mentioned before, Brittany, I haven't decided what to do with the apartment yet. I still have belongings there, and I need time to—" "Time for what?" Walter interrupted, his face flushed from the wine. "You're not using it. We need a place to live. Seems pretty straightforward to me." "Dad's right," Greg chimed in, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. My own brother, the person who'd borrowed money from me countless times, who I'd helped through college, who'd called me his rock just last year, was now staring at me with disappointment. "Curtis, you know they've been looking for months. The rental market is insane right now. You could really help them out." I took a slow breath, feeling all eyes on me. "I understand the rental market is difficult, but that doesn't mean I'm obligated to—" "Obligated?" Brittany's voice rose sharply. "We're family, Curtis. Family helps family. Or did you forget that when you bought this fancy new place?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I could see the other guests exchanging glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation had taken. This was supposed to be a celebration, not an intervention. "I haven't forgotten anything about family," I said quietly, "but I also haven't agreed to let anyone move into my apartment. I've been clear about this from the beginning." Marlene leaned forward, her voice taking on that syrupy tone people use when they're trying to manipulate you. "Curtis, honey, we're not asking for charity. We'd pay rent, of course. It's just that finding a decent place in this city is so hard, and we know you're not using it." "The apartment isn't available," I said, more firmly this time. "I'm sorry, but that's my final answer." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Greg's face hardened, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine anger directed at me. "Jesus, Curtis, when did you become so selfish?" His words hit me like a physical blow. "These are good people who need help, and you're sitting on an empty apartment like some kind of landlord." "Greg," I started, but Brittany cut me off. "No, let him talk," she said, her eyes gleaming with something that looked almost like satisfaction. "I want to hear Curtis explain to everyone why he can't spare a thought for family in need." The room was watching me now, waiting for my response. Marlo looked concerned, Aunt Linda appeared troubled, and even my other friends seemed to be questioning my position. This was exactly what Brittany wanted, a public trial where I'd be forced to defend myself or cave to the pressure. "I don't need to explain my decisions about my own property," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "The apartment is mine. I worked for it, I paid for it, and I'll decide what happens with it." "Your property," Brittany repeated mockingly. "Listen to yourself. You sound like some corporate slumlord, not a family man." "Brittany, that's enough," Aunt Linda said sharply, but the damage was already done. Greg shook his head in disgust. "I can't believe this. Mom and Dad would be ashamed of you right now, Curtis. They raised us to look out for each other, not to hoard what we have while family suffers." That was the line that broke something inside me, bringing up our deceased parents, using their memory as a weapon against me. It was lower than I'd expected, even from Greg in his current state. "Don't," I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Don't you dare bring them into this." But Brittany wasn't done. She sensed an opening, and she was pressing the advantage. "You know what your problem is, Curtis?" She stood up, wine glass in hand, her face flushed with righteous indignation. You've gotten so comfortable in your little bubble that you've forgotten what it means to be human, to care about anyone but yourself. Brittany, sit down, Marlowe said, clearly sensing where this was heading. No, I won't sit down, she snapped. Someone needs to say this. Curtis, you are being selfish, you are being cruel, and you are being exactly the kind of person who— Yes, stop. My voice was quiet but firm. You've said enough. I haven't even started. Brittany's voice was shrill now, her composure completely gone. You sit there in your new house, looking down on all of us, acting like you're better than— I said stop! For a moment, the room was perfectly still. Then Brittany's face twisted into something ugly, and she drew her arm back. The glass of red wine left her hand in a perfect arc, the burgundy liquid catching the light from my chandelier before it hit me square in the chest. The wine soaked through my white button-down shirt instantly, staining it dark red. Drops splattered across the table, onto my new hardwood floors, across the wall behind me. The glass itself bounced off my chest and shattered on the floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The only sound was the gentle tick of the grandfather clock in the corner and the soft drip of wine falling from the edge of the table onto the floor. I looked down at my ruined shirt, then up at Brittany, who was standing frozen with her hand still extended, as if she couldn't quite believe what she'd just done. Greg's mouth was hanging open, his face pale. Aunt Linda had her hand pressed to her chest in shock. Marlowe was half risen from his chair, his napkin clutched in his fist. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for my napkin and dabbed at the wine on my face. Then I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor in the silence. Curtis? Greg started, but I held up my hand. I didn't say a word. Not to Brittany, who was now backing away from the table, as if she'd just realized what she'd done. Not to Greg, who was looking between his wife and me with growing panic. Not to anyone. I simply walked out of the dining room, through the living room, and out the front door into the cool evening air. The silence followed me outside, broken only by the sound of the door closing behind me. I stood on my front porch, wine still dripping from my shirt, and pulled out my phone. The number was in my favorites, Andrea Rollins, my lawyer, and one of the few people I trusted completely in this world. She answered on the second ring. Curtis, it's kind of late for business calls. Everything okay? Her calm, professional voice was exactly what I needed to hear. I looked back at my house, where I could see shadows moving behind the curtains, probably my guests trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. Andrea, I said, my voice steady for the first time all evening, I need you to draw up a sale contract for the apartment. Tonight. There was a pause. The apartment? Curtis, I thought you were keeping that as an investment property. Change of plans, I said, watching as the front door opened and Marlowe stepped out, clearly looking for me. How quickly can we move on a sale? If you're serious about this, I can have the paperwork ready by tomorrow morning. But Curtis, are you sure? This seems sudden. I thought about Brittany's face as she threw that wine, about Greg's words, about the way they'd all sat there expecting me to cave to their pressure. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. Draw up the papers. I want it sold as quickly as possible. All right, Andrea said, and I could hear her shifting into business mode. I'll call you first thing in the morning. We'll get this done. I hung up and looked at Marlowe, who was approaching cautiously. Curtis, man, what the hell just happened in there? I smiled for the first time all evening. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was genuine. That, Marlowe, was the moment everything changed. The next morning, I sat in my favorite coffee shop downtown, staring at my phone as message after message poured into our family group chat. The wine stain was gone from my shirt, but the memory of last night burned just as bright as ever. Brittany. Curtis, I think we all need to talk about what happened last night. Emotions were running high, but we're still family. Walter. Son, your aunt says you left pretty upset. We didn't mean to gang up on you. Marlene. And maybe we can work something out that's fair for everyone. Greg. Curtis, call me. We need to fix this. I set the phone down and rubbed my temples. They still didn't get it. Even after what happened, they were still trying to manipulate me, still acting like I was the problem that needed to be solved. But I wasn't surprised. This was just the latest in a pattern that had been building for years, ever since Greg married Brittany 3 years ago. I remembered the first time I'd met her. Greg had been so excited, practically glowing, as he introduced us at a family barbecue. Curtis, this is Brittany. Brittany, this is my big brother, the one I told you about. She'd been charming then, all smiles and compliments about my apartment when Greg brought her over for dinner. Oh my God, Curtis, this place is amazing. You have such great taste. Greg, why can't we find something like this? At the time, I'd thought it was just normal couple talk. But looking back, I could see the seeds of what would come later. The way she'd measured the rooms with her eyes, commented on the rent I was paying, asked pointed questions about my lease terms. The request started small. Could she borrow my spare key to water my plants when I was out of town? Could she and Greg use the apartment for a dinner party since their place was too small? Could her parents stay there for a weekend when they visited, since my couch was more comfortable than Greg's? Each time, I'd said yes. Because that's what family does, right? You help each other out. But the requests kept growing. Brittany started treating my apartment like her personal storage unit, leaving boxes of her stuff in my closets, just temporarily. She'd show up unannounced with her friends, acting like she lived there. Once, I came home from a business trip to find she'd thrown a party without even asking, my furniture rearranged and wine stains on my carpet. When I confronted her about it, she'd laughed it off. "Oh, Curtis, don't be such a stick in the mud. It was just a few friends. We cleaned up afterward." But they hadn't cleaned up. Not really. And when I pointed out the damage to my carpet, she'd gotten defensive. "It's just a little stain. You're acting like we burned the place down. Besides, weren't you always saying how you wanted to replace that old carpet anyway?" That's when I should have put my foot down. That's when I should have seen what she was doing, slowly claiming ownership of my space, my belongings, my life. Instead, I'd changed the locks and told Greg I needed more boundaries. He'd been understanding at first, even apologetic about Brittany's behavior. But over time, as she worked on him, his attitude had shifted. "She's just trying to be family, Curtis," he'd said when I complained about her dropping by unannounced. "You know how she grew up. Her family was always in and out of each other's places. It's how she shows love." "It's how she shows ownership," I'd replied, but Greg had already stopped listening. The financial requests came next. Could I lend them money for a down payment on a car? Could I help with Greg's student loans? Could I co-sign for their apartment lease since Brittany's credit was temporarily bad? I'd said yes every time, because Greg was my brother and I'd been taking care of him since we were kids. When our parents were gone after a car accident 10 years ago, I'd been the one to handle all the arrangements, the estate matters, the endless paperwork. I'd been the one to make sure Greg finished college, got his teaching job, and found his footing in the world. Now I was starting to wonder if I'd been enabling him instead of helping him. My phone buzzed with another message. "Brittany. Curtis, I know you're reading these. Can we please just talk like adults? My parents are really struggling right now, and we thought family was supposed to help family. There it was again. The manipulation disguised as moral guidance. The way she made my refusal to hand over my apartment sound like a character flaw instead of a reasonable boundary." I scrolled back through months of messages, seeing the pattern more clearly now. Every request framed as a family obligation, every refusal met with guilt trips and emotional manipulation, every boundary I tried to set painted as selfishness or coldness. Brittany, 2 months ago. "Curtis, I know you're busy, but could you help us move this weekend?" Greg threw out his back, and we really need someone with a truck. Brittany, 6 weeks ago. "Hey, would it be okay if Mom and Dad stored some furniture in your apartment, just for a few weeks while they figure out their new place?" Brittany, 1 month ago. "Curtis, you're not using the apartment anyway. It seems silly to keep it empty when people who need it could be living there." And Greg, my own brother, had backed her up every single time. When had he stopped being on my side? When had he started seeing me as the obstacle instead of the solution? I thought about the apartment, my first real home, the place I'd saved for years to afford. I'd worked double shifts as a financial analyst, lived on ramen and cheap coffee, skipped vacations and nights out, all so I could make the down payment. It wasn't just a property to me. It was proof that I could build something, that I could take care of myself and the people I loved. But to Brittany, it was just an empty space that should belong to her family. My phone buzzed again. "Greg. Curtis, Brittany feels terrible about last night. She was just frustrated because her parents have been staying in that awful extended stay hotel for weeks. Can't we work something out?" I stared at the message, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. Even now, even after his wife had publicly humiliated me in my own home, Greg was making excuses for her. He was asking me to compromise, to find a middle ground, to be the bigger person. He wasn't asking her to apologize. He wasn't questioning her behavior. He was asking me to fix it. I finished my coffee and headed back to my apartment. My empty apartment that I'd barely had time to clear out because I'd been so busy with the new house, the apartment that Brittany's parents apparently thought was already theirs. When I got there, I found something that sent a chill through me. A small piece of paper taped to my mailbox, written in Marlene's careful handwriting. Harrow, 4B. They'd already changed the nameplate. Without asking, without permission, Without even waiting for my decision, they'd claimed my apartment as their own. I stood in the hallway, staring at that piece of paper, and felt the last of my patience evaporate. This wasn't about helping family anymore. This was about people who thought they could take whatever they wanted and use guilt to justify it. I pulled out my phone and called Andrea. "Curtis, I was just about to call you. I've got the sale paperwork ready." "Good," I said, tearing the nameplate off my mailbox and crumpling it in my fist. "Let's move fast on this. I want it sold before the end of the week." The next afternoon, I arrived at my apartment building to find a moving truck parked outside. My heart sank as I recognized Walter loading boxes from the back, while Marlene directed him toward the entrance. They were actually doing it. They were moving into my apartment without permission. I parked across the street and watched for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. Walter struggled with a heavy box labeled kitchen items, while Marlene consulted a clipboard, clearly organizing their belongings for the move-in. My phone rang. Brittany. "Curtis, thank God," she said when I answered. "I was hoping we could talk before you heard from anyone else. My parents are just moving a few things into storage at the apartment. Nothing permanent, just until we can work out the details." "Storage?" I said, watching Walter disappear into the building with another box. "Brittany, your father is moving furniture into my apartment right now." There was a pause. "Okay, look, maybe they're being a little presumptuous, but they're desperate, Curtis. That hotel is costing them a fortune, and they just need somewhere to stay while..." "While what? While I cave to your pressure and hand over my apartment?" "While we work out a fair arrangement." Her voice was rising, taking on that sharp edge I'd heard last night. "Curtis, we have a right to that place. You're not using it, you don't need it, and you're just being spiteful because of what happened at dinner." A right to that place. She'd actually said it out loud. "Brittany, you have no rights to my apartment. None. And if your parents don't remove their belongings immediately, I'm calling the police." "You wouldn't dare." But there was uncertainty in her voice now. "Try me." I hung up and got out of my car. By the time I reached the building entrance, Walter was coming back down for another load. He saw me and had the grace to look embarrassed. "Curtis, good to see you, son. We were just getting a head start on moving some things." "Moving things where, Walter?" "Well, to the apartment, of course. Brittany said you'd come around once you saw how much we needed the help." I felt that familiar cold anger settling in my chest. Brittany was wrong. You need to remove everything you've brought up there right now. Walter's face fell. "Now, Curtis, be reasonable. We've already paid the deposit on the moving truck, and Marlene's been packing for days. Can't we just..." "No." I walked past him toward the elevator. "You have 1 hour to get your stuff out, or I'm calling the police." I rode up to the 4th floor, my hands clenched into fists. The door to my apartment was propped open, and I could hear Marlene inside, talking to someone on the phone. "Yes, it's a lovely place. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, great natural light. We're so grateful Curtis is letting us stay here while we look for something permanent." I stepped through the doorway and saw boxes stacked in my living room, Marlene's clothes hanging in my bedroom closet, Walter's reading chair positioned by the window where my desk used to be. They'd made themselves at home. Marlene saw me and quickly ended her phone call. "Curtis, what a nice surprise. I was just telling my sister about how generous you're being. This place is perfect for us. Get out." The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I was past caring about politeness. "Excuse me? Get your things and get out of my apartment. Now." Marlene's face flushed red. "Curtis, I think there's been some miscommunication. Brittany assured us that you'd agreed to let us stay here while we looked for a place." "Brittany lied." "That's a terrible thing to say about your brother's wife." "It's also true." I pulled out my phone. "You have 30 minutes to pack up and leave, or I'm calling the police for trespassing." For a moment, Marlene just stared at me, clearly trying to decide if I was bluffing. Then she saw something in my face that convinced her I wasn't. "Fine," she said, her voice dripping with wounded dignity. "We'll leave. But I want you to know that this is not how family treats family, Curtis. Your parents would be ashamed." The second person in 2 days to drag my late parents into this as a weapon against me. I was getting really tired of it. "My parents would be ashamed of people who break into apartments that don't belong to them," I replied. 30 minutes, Marlene." I left her there and went to find my neighbor, Philip Tran, who lived across the hall. Philip was a quiet guy, a freelance graphic designer who worked from home and noticed everything that happened in the building. He answered his door with a concerned expression. "Curtis, hey, I was wondering when you'd show up. Those people have been coming and going for 3 days now." "3 days?" "Yeah, they had a key and everything. I figured you'd given them permission, but it seemed weird that they were moving so much stuff in when you'd just moved out." 3 days. They'd been treating my apartment like their own for 3 days, telling people I'd given them permission, acting like the decision had already been made. "Philip, I need a favor," I said. "If anyone asks, can you confirm that I never gave those people permission to be in my apartment?" His eyes widened. "Oh, no, they're squatting, aren't they?" "Something like that." "Yeah, absolutely. I've got security cameras in my hallway that probably caught them coming and going too, if you need evidence." Evidence. I hadn't even thought about that, but Philip was right. If this went legal, I'd need proof of what they'd been doing. "That would be incredibly helpful, thank you." By the time I got back to my apartment, Walter and Marlene were loading boxes back onto the cart, both of them shooting me dirty looks. Marlene was on her phone again, speaking in a loud voice clearly meant for me to overhear. "No, Brittany, he's throwing us out." "Yes," I said, throwing us out, like we're common criminals. I've never been so humiliated in my life. I ignored them and went to check my bedroom, making sure they hadn't left anything behind. That's when I found it, a folder of documents on my dresser, things that apparently brought to make the apartment feel more like home. Rental applications, bank statements, a lease agreement they'd drafted themselves, with my name as the landlord and theirs as the tenants, complete with a monthly rent amount that was about half the market rate. They hadn't just been presumptuous. They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. They'd prepared legal documents, gathered financial records, probably even started telling people they lived here. This wasn't desperation. This was a calculated attempt to steal my apartment. I photographed every document, then put them back exactly where I'd found them. Let them take their evidence of our supposed agreement. I had evidence of my own now. My phone buzzed with a text from Greg. "Greg, Curtis, Mom, and Dad are really upset. Can't you just let them stay for a week or two while they find something else? It's not like you're using the place." I stared at the message, feeling something shift inside me. My brother, my own brother, was still pushing me to accommodate the people who just tried to steal my apartment. When had I become the villain in this story? When had my refusal to be robbed become selfishness? I walked out to my car, leaving Walter and Marlene to finish packing their things. In the parking lot, I called Andrea. "Curtis, perfect timing. I've got 3 potential buyers already interested in the apartment. We could have showings as early as tomorrow." "Make it happen," I said, watching Walter load the last box into the moving truck. "And Andrea, I need you to document everything about this sale. Every conversation, every document, every step of the process." "That's standard practice, but can I ask why you're being extra cautious?" I thought about the lease agreement I'd found, about the nameplate on my mailbox, about 3 days of unauthorized occupation. Let's just say I have a feeling I'm going to need proof of everything before this is over. That evening, I sat in my new house, going through a box I'd brought from my home office at the old apartment. Inside were years of documents, loan agreements where I'd lent Greg money, receipts for things I'd paid for, screenshots of text conversations where Brittany had made increasingly demanding requests. I'd kept it all, not because I was planning for this moment, but because I'm a financial analyst. I keep records of everything. Now, looking through it all, I could see the pattern more clearly than ever. The gradual escalation, the way my boundaries had been tested and pushed, the way Greg had been turned against me bit by bit. At the bottom of the box was a folder I'd almost forgotten about, correspondence with my parents' lawyer from when I'd handled their estate. Inside were copies of their will, insurance documents, and a letter my father had written to both Greg and me to be opened only if there was ever a serious dispute between us. I'd never opened it. Greg didn't even know it existed. But sitting there in my new house, wine-stained and betrayed and tired of being treated like the villain, I thought maybe it was time to see what Dad had wanted to say to us. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from Aunt Linda. Aunt Linda. "Curtis, I think we all need to sit down and talk this through like adults. Sunday dinner at your place? Everyone needs to be there." I looked at the sealed letter in my hands, then at the phone. Sunday dinner. Everyone there. A chance for them to gang up on me again, to pressure me into giving up what was mine. Or maybe, just maybe, a chance for me to show them exactly who they'd been dealing with all along. I texted back, "Sunday works. I'll provide dinner. Make sure everyone comes." Then I opened my father's letter and began to read. Thursday morning, I sat in Andrea's office, signing papers that would change everything. The sale contract for my apartment was spread across her mahogany desk, clean, legal, and absolutely final. "The buyer is offering full asking price," Andrea said, sliding another document toward me. "Cash sale, no contingencies, closing in 5 days. It's almost too good to be true." "Why the rush on their end?" I asked, though I was grateful for it. They're relocating for work and need to move fast. Well, lucky for you, unlucky for anyone else who might have wanted to make an offer. She paused, studying my face. Curtis, you seem different. More focused. What's really going on here? I thought about how to explain it. Let's just say some people have been taking liberties with my property, and I'm done accommodating them. Andrea nodded knowingly. She'd been my lawyer for 8 years, ever since I'd bought the apartment, and she'd seen her share of family drama over real estate. Well, once this sale goes through, they won't be your problem anymore. The new owners take possession on Tuesday. Tuesday. 5 days from now. I signed the final document with a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in months. From Andrea's office, I went straight to Kelly Harmon's real estate office. Kelly was the agent handling the sale, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd built her reputation on getting deals done quickly and quietly. Curtis, congratulations, she said, shaking my hand firmly. This is one of the smoothest transactions I've handled all year. Your apartment showed beautifully yesterday. Yesterday? I hadn't known there were showings scheduled. Oh yes, I had 3 different parties through there. The buyers who made the offer loved the hardwood floors and the natural light, though I have to say there was some confusion with one of the other potential buyers. My stomach tightened. What kind of confusion? Kelly consulted her notes. A couple in their 60s, Walter and Marlene something, showed up claiming they were already living there. They seemed quite upset when I explained the apartment was for sale. The woman actually tried to block access to the bedroom, saying it was their space now. I closed my eyes, feeling a headache building. What did you do? I called building security, of course. They confirmed that the apartment was vacant and that you were the sole owner. The couple left after that, but they were not happy about it. Kelly looked at me with concern. Is there something I should know about this situation? Just some family members who got the wrong idea about the apartment's availability. It won't be a problem going forward. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Walter and Marlene had tried to sabotage the showing, probably hoping to scare off potential buyers so they could pressure me into letting them stay. The audacity was breathtaking. My phone rang as I left Kelly's office. Greg. Curtis, what the hell is going on? Marlene just called Brittany in tears, saying some real estate agent kicked them out of the apartment. The apartment is for sale, Greg. I told you that. You told me you were thinking about it. I didn't think you'd actually. Curtis, you can't do this. They have nowhere else to go. They have the same places everyone else has. Hotels, rental listings, family members who actually want to help them. We would help them, but our place is too small, and we can't afford... Not my problem. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was tired of this conversation. Tired of being expected to solve everyone else's problems while my own needs and boundaries were ignored. Jesus, Curtis, when did you become so cold? When people started breaking into my apartment and trying to steal it from me. Steal it? They're not trying to steal anything. They just need a place to stay. Greg, they prepared fake lease documents with my name on them. They changed the nameplate on my mailbox. They've been telling people I gave them permission to live there. What would you call that? There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, That doesn't sound right. Are you sure? For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Greg was finally starting to see what his in-laws were really like. I'm sure. I have photos of the documents, witness statements from neighbors, security camera footage of them moving in without permission. I need to talk to Brittany about this. You do that. I hung up and drove to the bank, where I had an appointment to discuss paying off my new house early with the proceeds from the apartment sale. The loan officer, Patricia Vance, greeted me with a smile. Mr. Alden, this is unusual, but certainly welcome. Paying off a mortgage this early will save you tens of thousands in interest over the life of the loan. That's the plan. She pulled up my account information on her computer. With the sale of your apartment, you'll have enough to pay off the remaining balance and still have a substantial emergency fund left over. You'll own your house free and clear. Free and clear. No mortgage, no debt, no leverage anyone could use against me. It felt like freedom. As I left the bank, my phone buzzed with a series of text messages. Brittany. Curtis, I just talked to Greg. There's obviously been some kind of misunderstanding about the lease documents. Brittany, my parents would never try to forge anything. They're honest people who just need help. Brittany, I think someone is trying to cause trouble between our families. I almost laughed. Even caught red-handed, she was still trying to spin the situation, still trying to make me doubt what I'd seen with my own eyes. But then the messages took a different tone. Walter. Curtis. I don't know what kind of lies you've been telling people, but we never forged any documents. Marlene. We're going to talk to a lawyer about this harassment. You can't just make false accusations. Brittany, if you sell that apartment out of spite, you'll be destroying this family. Is that really what you want? Greg, Curtis, please. Let's all sit down and talk this through. Don't do something you'll regret. Threats and guilt trips delivered in rapid succession. They were panicking now, realizing that their plan wasn't working, that I wasn't going to cave to pressure, but they still didn't understand who they were dealing with. I drove to my old apartment building one last time, wanting to collect the last of my personal items before the sale went through. In the lobby, I ran into Philip Tran, who was checking his mail. Curtis, hey, I've got those security camera files you wanted. Burned them to a disk for you. He handed me a small envelope. Also, I should mention, those people came by again yesterday, trying to get the building manager to let them in. They claimed they had a lease agreement with you. What did the building manager say? He told them to take it up with you directly, but they seemed pretty confident that they had legal rights to the place. The woman kept saying something about squatters' rights and how they had established residency. Squatters' rights. They were actually researching legal ways to steal my apartment. Philip, I can't thank you enough for keeping track of all this. No problem. I've been wondering, though, what's your endgame here? Are you planning to press charges? I thought about it. Criminal charges would be messy, public, and would probably tear what was left of my family apart. But there were other ways to handle this. Let's just say I'm planning to make sure they understand the consequences of their actions. That evening, I sat in my home office, organizing everything I'd gathered over the past few days. The security camera footage showing Walter and Marlene entering my apartment without permission. Photos of the fake lease documents they'd prepared. Screenshots of text messages where Brittany had made increasingly entitled demands. But the most damaging evidence was something I'd found in my father's papers. A detailed record of every loan I'd made to Greg over the years, every bill I'd paid, every time I'd bailed him out financially. Dad had been keeping track, probably worried about the pattern he was seeing. The total was staggering. Over the past 10 years, I'd given Greg more than $40,000 in loans, co-signed agreements, and outright gifts. Money for his car, his student loans, his wedding, his apartment deposits, emergency medical bills, an endless stream of financial support that he'd apparently forgotten about. But I hadn't forgotten, and neither had Dad, apparently. There was a note in his handwriting at the bottom of the ledger. Curtis gives too much. Greg takes too much. Someday this will cause problems. Dad had been right, as usual. My phone rang. Marlo. Curtis, man, I've been thinking about what happened at your dinner party. That was seriously messed up. Yeah, it was. Are you okay? You seemed pretty calm when you walked out, but throwing a drink at someone, that's assault, you know? I know. Are you going to do anything about it? I looked at the evidence spread across my desk. Months of manipulation, years of financial exploitation, and finally, a physical attack when I'd refused to hand over my apartment. I'm going to do something about all of it. What does that mean? It means Sunday dinner is going to be very interesting. Friday morning brought a call from Andrea with news that made everything feel suddenly real. The sale is final, Curtis. The new owners took possession this morning, and the funds have been transferred to your account. Congratulations, you're now completely debt-free. I looked out the window of my house, owned free and clear, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete financial independence, no mortgage, no debt, no leverage anyone could hold over me. Thank you, Andrea, for everything. Just doing my job. Though I have to ask, have you told your family about the sale yet? I checked my phone, which had been surprisingly quiet all morning. Not yet. I think they're still hoping I'll change my mind. Well, they're going to find out soon enough. The new owners are moving in this weekend. After I hung up, I drove to the coffee shop where I'd been meeting Marlo regularly since the dinner party disaster. He was already there, looking concerned. You look different, he said as I sat down. More, I don't know, settled? The apartment sold, closed this morning. Marlo's eyebrows shot up. Wow, you actually did it. How do you feel? Relieved. And I was. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control over my own life again. No more pressure, no more guilt trips, no more people trying to claim ownership of my property. And your family? Do they know yet? They'll find out soon enough. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone started buzzing with messages. I showed Marlo the screen as they poured in. Brittany. Curtis, the building manager, just called. He says new people are moving into the apartment. What's going on? Walter. Son. There must be some mistake. We were told the apartment was ours. Greg, Curtis, please tell me you didn't actually sell it. Please. Marlene, this is a disaster. We've already put deposits down on utilities and given our forwarding address to the post office. Marlo whistled low. They really thought they had it locked up, didn't they? They never considered that I might actually stand up for myself. My phone rang. Brittany, of course. Curtis, what have you done? Her voice was shrill, panicked. There are strangers in our apartment. It's not your apartment, Brittany. It never was. But we had an agreement. We talked about this. You talked. I said no, repeatedly. You can't do this. My parents have nowhere to go. They have the same options they had before they tried to steal my apartment. Hotels, rentals, maybe one of your other relatives who's more generous than I am. Generous? Curtis, this isn't about generosity. This is about family. This is about doing the right thing. I felt that familiar cold anger rising, but this time it was controlled, focused. The right thing was respecting my decision the first time I said no. The right thing was not breaking into my apartment. The right thing was not preparing fake lease documents with my name on them. We never... I have photos, Brittany. I have security camera footage. I have witness statements. Don't lie to me anymore. There was silence on the other end, then the sound of muffled conversation. She was talking to someone else, probably Walter or Greg. Curtis, she said finally, her voice taking on a different tone, harder, more threatening. If you don't fix this, you're going to destroy this family. Greg is devastated. My parents are talking about moving back to Florida. Is that what you want? To tear everyone apart because you're too selfish to share? I'm not tearing anything apart, Brittany. You did that when you threw wine at me in my own house. That was a mistake. I was upset. No, that was assault, and this conversation is over. I hung up and turned off my phone. Marlo was staring at me with something that might have been admiration. I've never seen you like this before, he said. You're usually so accommodating. I'm tired of being accommodating to people who don't accommodate me back. That afternoon, I spent several hours preparing for Sunday's dinner. Not the food, I'd ordered catering from a nice Italian restaurant, but the presentation I was going to give my family. I printed out copies of everything. The apartment sale contract with the closing date clearly highlighted, bank statements showing the mortgage payoff, the security camera footage burned to DVDs, screenshots of every manipulative text message, every guilt trip, every attempt to pressure me into handing over my property. But the centerpiece was something I'd found in my father's papers, a letter he'd written but never sent, addressed to the whole family. In it, he'd expressed concern about the way Greg was becoming financially dependent on me and the way some family members seemed to think my success was something they were entitled to share. Curtis has worked hard for what he has, the letter read. He's been generous to a fault, but generosity should never be taken for granted. If anyone in this family ever tries to claim ownership of what Curtis has earned, they'll be showing their true character, and it won't be pretty. Dad had seen this coming years before it happened. A Saturday evening, Aunt Linda called to confirm Sunday's dinner. Curtis, honey, I just want to make sure everyone's going to be there. Greg and Brittany, her parents, Marlo, me, we all need to sit down and work this out like adults. Everyone will be there, I said. And yes, we're definitely going to work this out. Good. I know emotions have been running high, but family is family. We'll find a way through this. Aunt Linda meant well, but she didn't understand what had really been happening. She saw this as a misunderstanding, a communication problem that could be solved with good intentions and honest conversation. She was about to learn otherwise. Sunday morning, I got up early to set up the dining room. The catered food was arranged on warming trays, the table was set for 8 people, and at each place setting was a manila folder containing copies of all the evidence I'd gathered. At the head of the table, where I'd be sitting, was a larger folder containing the originals and a few additional items I'd been saving for the right moment. My phone had been buzzing all morning with messages I wasn't reading. I could see from the notifications that Greg, Brittany, and her parents were all trying to reach me, probably hoping to negotiate or threaten their way out of the consequences of their actions. But the time for negotiation was over. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Greg and Brittany standing on my porch, both looking nervous and angry. Curtis, Greg said, we need to talk before everyone else gets here. We'll talk when everyone's here. No, this is between us. Between brothers. He tried to push past me into the house, but I didn't move. Everything that needs to be said will be said in front of the whole family. That's what you wanted, isn't it? Family involvement in my personal business? Brittany's face was flushed, her eyes red from crying. Curtis, please. My parents are devastated. They don't understand how you could do this to them. They understand perfectly. They just didn't think there would be consequences. The next car to arrive was Walter and Marlene's, followed closely by Aunt Linda and Marlo. Soon my living room was full of the same people who'd been there for the housewarming dinner, minus the friends who'd witnessed Brittany's wine-throwing incident. "Well," Aunt Linda said, settling into her chair with a determined smile, "I'm glad we're all here. Curtis has been generous enough to host dinner again, and I think we can work through this misunderstanding if we all approach it with open hearts." "It's not a misunderstanding," I said quietly. "But you're right. We're going to work through it." I gestured toward the dining room. "Dinner is served." As everyone filed in and found their seats, I watched their faces as they noticed the manila folders. Greg picked his up and started to open it, but I held up my hand. "Let's eat first, then we'll talk." The meal was tense, filled with stilted conversation and worried glances. Brittany kept trying to catch my eye, probably hoping to gauge my mood or find some sign that I might be willing to compromise. Walter and Marlene whispered to each other, occasionally shooting me looks that ranged from pleading to hostile. Greg just stared at his plate, eating mechanically. Finally, when everyone had finished eating, I stood up and walked to the head of the table. "Before we begin," I said, "I want everyone to open their folders." The sound of rustling paper filled the room as 8 people opened their manila folders and began to read. I watched their faces change as they processed what they were seeing. Aunt Linda's eyes widened as she read the text message screenshots. Marlo shook his head in disbelief at the photos of the fake lease documents. Walter and Marlene exchanged panicked looks as they saw the security camera timestamps, but it was Greg's reaction that mattered most to me. My brother, my little brother who I'd protected and supported for 30 years, sat there reading evidence of his wife's manipulation, his in-laws' attempted theft, and his own betrayal of our relationship. "Greg," I said quietly, "do you have anything to say?" He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Curtis, I didn't know. I didn't know about the lease documents or the security cameras or—" He trailed off, looking at Brittany with something that might have been disgust. "You knew about the text messages," I said. "You knew about the pressure campaign. You knew about the wine glass." I thought you were just being stubborn. I thought if we could just make you understand how much they needed help." "What you thought," I said, opening my own folder, "was that you could pressure me into giving up my property because you've never had to face consequences for taking advantage of me before." I pulled out the financial records. 10 years of loans, gifts, and bailouts, totaling more than $40,000. "This is what I've given you over the years, Greg. $43,867, not including the co-signed loans, the emergency help, the times I covered your rent when you were short." The room was completely silent now. Even Brittany had stopped fidgeting. "I never asked for any of it back. I never held it over your head. I never used it as leverage to get something from you, because that's what family does. We help each other without keeping score." I pulled out another document, my father's unsent letter. But Dad was keeping score. He saw what was happening, saw how you were becoming dependent on my generosity while Brittany was becoming entitled to it. I read the letter aloud, watching Greg's face crumble as he heard our father's words about responsibility, boundaries, and the difference between helping family and enabling them. When I finished reading, the silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Then Brittany finally spoke, her voice small and defensive. "We never meant for it to go this far. We needed help, and you have so much, and it seemed unfair that you wouldn't share." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the manipulative schemer who'd been making my life miserable, but a spoiled child who'd never learned that wanting something doesn't mean you're entitled to it. "Brittany," I said, "you threw a glass of wine at me because I wouldn't give you my apartment. You broke into my home, prepared fake legal documents, and tried to steal my property. You turned my brother against me and made me the villain for refusing to be robbed. I was frustrated. You were entitled. There's a difference." I turned to Walter and Marlene, who were sitting frozen in their chairs. "And you two. You didn't just ask for help. You tried to take what wasn't offered. You moved into my apartment without permission, changed the nameplate, prepared lease agreements, and told people you lived there. You tried to establish squatters' rights to property you had no claim to." Walter started to speak, but I held up my hand. "I'm not done." I pulled out the final document, the apartment sale contract with the closing date clearly highlighted. The apartment sold on Friday. The new owners moved in yesterday. The proceeds paid off my mortgage, so I now own this house free and clear. You can't pressure me anymore. You can't guilt me anymore. And you can't threaten me anymore, because I don't need anything from any of you. The room exploded into chaos. Brittany started crying. Walter began shouting about family loyalty. Marlene accused me of being vindictive, and Aunt Linda tried desperately to restore order. But through it all, Greg just sat there, staring at the evidence of what his wife and in-laws had done, what he'd enabled them to do, and what it had cost him. Finally, he looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. "Curtis," he said, his voice broken. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And for the first time in months, I saw my real brother again. Not Brittany's puppet, not her parents' enabler, but the person I'd spent my whole life protecting and supporting. But it was too late for apologies. I walked back to my chair and sat down, looking at each person around the table, the family that had tried to shame me, pressure me, and ultimately steal from me. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice calm and final. "Brittany, you're going to apologize for assaulting me, and you're going to mean it. Walter and Marlene, you're going to admit that you tried to steal my apartment and that every sob story you told was manipulation. Greg, you're going to choose, right now, in front of everyone, whether your loyalty is to the people who tried to rob your brother or to the brother who's been supporting you for 30 years. The silence that followed was deafening. 8 people sitting around my dining room table, the evidence of months of manipulation and attempted theft spread out before them, waiting to see who would speak first. Brittany looked at Greg, clearly expecting him to defend her, to find some way to spin this back onto me. But Greg was looking at the financial records, at the text messages, at the photos of fake lease documents his wife's parents had prepared. He was seeing, maybe for the first time, exactly who he'd married and what she'd turned him into. "Curtis," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're my brother. You've always been there for me, and I chose them over you. I let them turn me against you." He turned to Brittany, his face hard with anger and disappointment. "How could you do this? How could you lie to me about the lease documents? How could you make me think Curtis was the problem when you were trying to steal from him?" Greg, I can explain." "No." His voice was stronger now, more certain. "You can't explain this. You threw wine at my brother. Your parents broke into his apartment. You've been manipulating me for months, making me think he was selfish when all along you were trying to take what wasn't yours." Brittany's face went white as she realized that her primary weapon, Greg's loyalty, had just been turned against her. "Greg, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "I understand that I've been foolish, and that I've allowed you and your parents to treat my brother unfairly while he's done nothing but support our family for years." He turned to me, tears still streaming down his face. "Curtis, I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I'm done with this. I'm done with them. I'm done being manipulated into betraying the person who's been the most important part of my life since we were kids." The room erupted again, but this time it was Walter and Marlene shouting at Greg, Brittany screaming at everyone, and Aunt Linda trying desperately to mediate. But I just sat there, watching my brother finally stand up to the people who'd been using him to get to me, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Victory. The chaos continued for several minutes, Brittany screaming at Greg, Walter demanding that someone fix this mess, Marlene sobbing about how they'd been betrayed by family. Through it all, I remained seated at the head of my dining room table, calm and unmoved by the storm I'd unleashed. Finally, Aunt Linda managed to restore some semblance of order by standing up and raising her voice above the din. "Enough! Everyone just stop shouting for 1 minute." The room fell into an uneasy quiet, broken only by Marlene's continued sniffling and the sound of Brittany's ragged breathing. "Now," Aunt Linda continued, looking around the table with a mixture of disappointment and determination, "I think we all need to take a step back and—" "No," I said quietly, but my voice carried clearly in the silence. "We're not taking a step back. We're not finding middle ground. We're not compromising. This ends here, tonight." I stood up again, and this time I pulled out the final piece of evidence I'd been saving, a folder I'd kept locked in my safe for years. "Since we're talking about family loyalty and who's been selfish," I said, opening the folder, "I think everyone should see exactly what that loyalty has cost me over the years." I began pulling out documents, spreading them across the table like a dealer laying out cards. Bank statements, loan agreements, receipts, canceled checks, a paper trail of financial support that went back more than a decade. Greg's student loan payments when he couldn't find work after college, $8,000. I placed the receipts in front of him. The down payment for your car when your credit was too bad to get financing, $12,000. Greg's face went pale as he recognized the documents. The emergency room bill when Brittany broke her wrist and you didn't have insurance, $3,000. The deposit for your wedding venue when the original place fell through, $5,000. The rent I covered for 6 months when you were between teaching jobs, $9,000. With each revelation, I placed more evidence on the table. Brittany had gone completely silent, staring at the mounting pile of proof that her husband had been financially dependent on me for years. The loan for Brittany's car, $7,000, still unpaid. The money for your honeymoon when your savings fell short, $4,000. The security deposit for your current apartment, $2,000. Walter and Marlene were looking at the documents with growing horror, finally understanding the scope of what I'd been providing for their daughter's family. And that's not counting the smaller things, I continued, pulling out a thick folder of receipts. Groceries when you were short on money, utilities when you couldn't make the payments, gas money, medical bills, car repairs, Christmas gifts for Brittany's family that I bought because you couldn't afford them. I looked around the table at faces that ranged from shocked to ashamed to angry. $43,867 in direct financial support over 10 years. Not loans, gifts, not investments, charity, money I gave freely because you're my brother and I love you. Greg was crying openly now, his hands shaking as he reached for the documents. Curtis, I never realized it was so much. I never kept track. I know you didn't, because you never had to, because I never made you feel guilty about it, never held it over your head, never demanded anything in return except basic respect and appreciation. I turned to Brittany, who was still staring at the evidence with a look of dawning comprehension. But you knew, didn't you, Brittany? You knew exactly how much Greg depended on me financially. That's why you thought you could pressure me into giving you the apartment. You thought I was so invested in taking care of Greg that I'd do anything to keep the peace? She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. You were wrong, I said simply. My generosity has limits, and you found them. Walter finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. Son, we had no idea you'd been supporting them so much. If you'd known, you would have pushed even harder, I interrupted. You would have seen it as proof that I had money to spare, that I should be helping your family too. I pulled out one final document, a letter I'd written but never sent, addressed to Greg, explaining my frustration with Brittany's increasing demands and his failure to set boundaries with her. I wrote this 6 months ago, I said, handing it to him. I never sent it because I hoped things would get better. I hoped you'd see what was happening and put a stop to it yourself. Greg read the letter with growing horror, his face crumpling as he saw his behavior through my eyes. The way he'd started taking my support for granted, the way he'd begun siding with Brittany against me, the way he'd stopped appreciating what I was doing for him. When he finished reading, he looked up at me with an expression of complete devastation. Curtis, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to fix this. You can start, I said, by admitting what really happened here, not just to me, but to everyone in this room. Greg looked around the table, his gaze lingering on Brittany, who was still frozen in shock. I let my wife and her parents manipulate me into betraying my brother, he said, his voice gaining strength with each word. I took his generosity for granted. I sided against him when he tried to set reasonable boundaries. I called him selfish when he was the most generous person in my life. He turned to Brittany, and I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Genuine anger. Not the frustrated petulance he sometimes showed, but real, deep fury. And you, he said to her, you knew. You knew how much he'd done for us, and you used it against him. You made me think he owed us something, that his success was somehow unfair unless he shared it with us. Greg, please? You threw wine at him. Greg's voice rose to a shout. You assaulted my brother in his own home because he wouldn't give you his apartment. What kind of person does that? Brittany finally seemed to find her voice, but instead of apologizing, she went on the attack. What kind of person hoards an empty apartment while family suffers? She shot back. What kind of person sells it out of spite instead of helping people who need it? The room went completely silent. Even Marlene stopped sniffling. I smiled. Not a happy smile, but the cold, satisfied expression of someone who'd just been handed exactly what they needed. Thank you, Brittany, I said quietly. Thank you for making it clear that even now, even after seeing all the evidence, even after watching your husband realize what you've done to our family, you still think you're the victim here. I gathered up all the documents, all the evidence, all the proof of years of support and months of manipulation. You still think I owed you my apartment. You still think my refusal to be robbed was spite. You still think you're entitled to what I've worked for. I looked around the table one final time, meeting each person's eyes. Well, let me make something absolutely clear to everyone here. I don't owe anyone anything. Not my apartment, not my money, not my support, and definitely not my tolerance for people who think they can steal from me and call it family loyalty. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. Brittany, Walter, Marlene, get out of my house. Don't contact me again. Don't ask me for anything again. and don't ever try to use Greg to manipulate me again." Walter started to protest. "Now see here, Curtis. Get out." The force of my voice shocked everyone, including myself. But it worked. Walter and Marlene scrambled to their feet, gathering their coats with shaking hands. Brittany followed more slowly, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. At the door, she turned back to Greg, who was still sitting at the table. "Are you coming?" Greg looked at her, then at me, then at all the evidence of what she'd done spread across my dining room table. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not." For a moment, Brittany just stared at him, clearly unable to process what she was hearing. "Greg, I'm your wife. You're a thief and a manipulator who tried to steal from my brother and turn me against him. Greg, go, Brittany, just go." She stood there for another few seconds, looking between Greg and me, probably trying to find some angle, some way to salvage the situation. But there was nothing left to salvage. She walked out without another word, her parents trailing behind her like defeated soldiers. I closed the door and returned to the dining room, where Greg was still sitting amid the wreckage of his marriage, staring at the evidence of his wife's betrayal. "Curtis," he said without looking up, "I know you can never forgive me for this. I know I've destroyed everything between us, but I need you to know that I see it now. I see what she did, what they did, what I let them do." He finally raised his eyes to meet mine, and I saw my little brother again. Not the manipulated husband, not the entitled in-law, but the person I'd been protecting and supporting my whole life. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." I looked at him sitting there, broken and ashamed, finally understanding the full scope of what had been done to both of us. Brittany hadn't just tried to steal my apartment. She'd stolen my brother, turned him into a weapon against me, and then discarded him when he was no longer useful. For a moment, I felt the old instinct to comfort him, to tell him it would be okay, to start the process of rebuilding our relationship. But then I remembered the wine glass hitting my chest. I remembered him calling me selfish in front of our family. I remembered months of pressure and manipulation and betrayal. I walked over to where he was sitting and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Greg," I said quietly, "you chose them over me. You believed the worst about me instead of trusting the person who'd been there for you your entire life. You called me selfish while I was supporting you, cold while I was being generous, spiteful while I was being patient." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I know I did. And now that you've seen who they really are, now that you've realized what they cost you, you want my forgiveness." "I don't deserve it," he said. "I know I don't deserve it." I squeezed his shoulder, then let my hand fall away. "You're right," I said. "You don't." The words hung in the air between us, final and absolute. Greg's face crumpled, but he didn't argue, didn't protest, didn't try to negotiate. He just sat there, accepting the consequences of his choices. I gathered up the last of the documents and put them back in their folders. The evidence of years of support, months of manipulation, and one night of perfect, devastating revenge. "The apartment is sold," I said, my voice calm and businesslike. "My house is paid off. I'm financially independent and completely free of anyone who thinks they're entitled to what I've earned." I looked around my dining room, in my house, bought with my money and owned free and clear. And Brittany Harrow Alden just found out exactly what happens when someone tries to steal from me. Greg looked up at me one last time, his face a mask of grief and regret. "Curtis, is there anything at all I can do to make this right?" I considered the question seriously, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The years of support, the months of pressure, the night of public humiliation, and finally, this evening's reckoning. "Yes," I said finally. "There is one thing you can do." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Learn from this. Learn what it costs to betray the people who love you. Learn what happens when you let toxic people turn you against your own family. Learn the difference between helping someone and enabling them." I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final look at my brother, sitting alone at my table, surrounded by the evidence of his wife's betrayal and his own complicity. "And Greg, next time someone tries to convince you that generosity is an obligation instead of a gift, remember this night." I left him sitting there and went to the kitchen, where Aunt Linda and Marlo were waiting, both looking shell-shocked by what they'd witnessed. "Curtis," Aunt Linda said softly, that was something else entirely." "That was justice," I replied, beginning to clear the dishes from dinner. That was what happens when someone pushes a quiet man too far. Marlo helped me load the dishwasher, shaking his head in amazement. "I've known you for 15 years, and I've never seen you like that. It was like watching a completely different person. Not different, I said, putting away the last of the evidence folders. Just done being taken advantage